Let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Kahlil Gibran. You can love someone with your whole heart and still feel the ache of no longer being aligned with the person they've become beside you. You try to ignore it at first. You tell yourself that all relationships go through phases, that maybe it's just a rough patch and things will return. You soften yourself to keep things smooth. You laugh a little harder, nod a little more. Pretend that the silence between you isn't growing louder. You reach for old versions of them, memories where things felt effortless. But the present keeps reminding you that something fundamental has shifted. You begin to shrink in small ways. You stop sharing your biggest thoughts because you're not sure they'd understand the you that's unfolding now. You start feeling lonelier in their presence than in solitude. It's a strange sadness, loving someone and still feeling entirely unseen at the same time. You catch yourself pretending again, performing peace, playing the role of who you were, even though you've outgrown that version of yourself. You notice how your voice becomes quieter. Not because you have less to say, but because you're not sure they're listening with the same heart anymore. You crave conversations that feel like soul recognition, but what you find is surface talk and emotional distance wrapped in familiar routines. And yet you stay, not because it feels right anymore, but because you still remember what it felt like when it did. Keep showing up, half hopeful, half heavy, wondering if maybe with enough love and patience, the gap between you will start to close again. You try to explain the disconnection, but the words get caught in your chest. You don't want to hurt them. You just want to be real again. You ache for alignment, for mutual growth, for the feeling of moving forward together instead of circling the same old misunderstandings in silence. But something inside you knows the truth, that this relationship now requires you to abandon parts of yourself in order to stay close. And that's the moment your heart begins grieving. Quietly, slowly, without announcement, because you realize love alone is no longer enough to hold this together. You start to notice the pause before you speak. A quiet filter builds between your thoughts and your mouth. You wonder when that hesitation began. Once, you could say anything. Now, you choose carefully, not because of growth, but because you've learned which parts of you don't land well anymore. They used to light up when you shared new dreams, and they look confused, maybe even uncomfortable, and you find yourself downplaying your excitement. You stop talking about the things that move your soul, because the silence that follows feels louder than any disagreement could ever sound. You begin to crave conversations that stretch beyond the surface, but theirs remain rooted in repetition, safe, predictable, unchanging, and quietly unsatisfying. You look around during dinner and realize you're talking less. Not out of anger, but out of emptiness. You have to shrink to stay connected. Your opinions feel too sharp for them now. Your growth feels like rebellion. Your voice too unfamiliar. You've changed, and they haven't asked why. They keep referencing the old you, the version who never questioned, never challenged, never reached so far, the version you had to leave behind to survive. You catch yourself pretending to be that person again just to keep things easy. Even though wearing that self now feels like stepping into a shell that no longer fits, there's a sadness in pretending, a grief in performing a role that feels like a memory instead of a truth. But it's the only way they see you. You still laugh, but it feels slightly offbeat. Not forced, but filtered. Not fake, but not full either. It's laughter built from habit, not from resonance. You used to feel understood by them without having to explain. Now, even when you use the clearest words, something gets lost in translation. You're more honest in your journal than in their presence. It's more free with strangers than with someone who once knew every corner of your mind. They respond to your changes with discomfort, or dismissal, or confusion, not curiosity. And that's how you know they never imagined you would evolve this way. You used to think relationships should be safe, but now you understand they also need to be spacious. A love that limits growth is not love that lasts. You ask yourself questions you didn't before. Who am I in this connection? Who do I have to become to stay here? And is that person still me? You feel exhausted after spending time together. Not because of conflict, but because of the constant effort to translate your soul into simpler terms. You keep searching for moments of closeness, but they're fewer now, scattered between routines and silence. You begin to mourn them even as they sit beside you. There is no fight, no dramatic exit, just slow erosion. The intimacy fades, not from neglect, but from misalignment that neither of you are ready to name. Your growth asks for space. Your intuition asks for truth. Your body feels the weight of compromise before your mind is willing to admit what's been lost. Because love isn't logic. It doesn't vanish just because something no longer works. It doesn't retreat the moment the relationship begins to fall out of rhythm. You can still remember how they made you feel seen during seasons when you didn't even know how to look at yourself with kindness. They showed up when you were breaking and held pieces of you hadn't yet learned how to name, let alone offer to anyone else. You remember the way their voice calmed your storms, how their presence was enough to make chaos seem like background noise instead of a threat. There were nights when the world felt like too much, and their arms were the only place you could breathe without explanation, without shame. You were both different then, simpler maybe, less burdened. You met each other in a chapter that needed exactly what the other person offered. Some part of your soul attached to the memory of being loved without needing to be impressive, fixed, or always strong, that stays with you. They were your mirror when you couldn't see yourself clearly. They reminded you of who you were at a time when your identity felt like smoke. And even now, as you sit in misalignment, you feel gratitude. Because without them, you wouldn't have made it through certain seasons alive. They saw a version of you you're not sure others ever will. A raw, unfiltered self you hadn't yet learned to protect or polish. You still laugh at old jokes in your head, still remember the scent of certain places, still smile when you drive by the roads you once drove together. You want to be angry for how distant things feel now, but the truth is, no one broke this. It just faded. And it's hard to hate what quietly dissolves. You keep holding on not to what is, but to what was. Not because you're naive, but because the love that existed then still feels real to you now. Sometimes you confuse loyalty with staying, but love and longevity aren't always the same. You can love someone without needing to walk beside them forever. You still want good things for them. You still defend their name. When others question what happened, you still protect their memory because it once protected you. The pain isn't in the loss of presence, it's in the fact that you still carry them gently in your chest, even when your hands have already let go. You know they weren't perfect. You've long accepted that. But they were what you needed when you didn't even know what you needed, and that kind of love is hard to release. Sometimes what keeps you tethered isn't the person, but the version of yourself you became in their love, the version you still miss in moments of quiet. You want to hate how much you still care. You want to be further along in your healing. But love doesn't follow timelines. It doesn't obey logic. It simply lingers. And maybe, just maybe, part of you is still loving them, not for who they are today, but for who they allowed you to be when you felt most lost. There's a moment when you stop asking what changed and start accepting that something has. It doesn't arrive loudly, but it stays with quiet certainty. You realize you're doing more work to hold the relationship together than to hold yourself, and that imbalance has become your new normal. You feel tired after being around them, but it's not the kind of tired sleep can fix. It's the tired that comes from hiding parts of who you are. You used to feel alive when you were together. Now you feel small, like you're constantly translating your soul into a language they stopped learning. You keep waiting for a moment when it all makes sense again. But deep down, you know clarity doesn't come from them. It's already growing inside you. It's true. You notice how much energy you spend pretending everything's okay? You keep peace on the outside while your insides are quietly unraveling. You've forgiven the same silences too many times. You've filled in emotional blanks they no longer try to explain, and it's wearing you thin. Start speaking less, not because you have less to say, but because they don't make space to hear it. Silence becomes safer than effort. You used to dream with them. Now you dream despite them. You edit your future quietly, removing the parts where they no longer fit. You wonder if maybe you're asking too much. But then you remember being seen, heard, and grown with isn't too much. It's the foundation of love, not a favor. You try to reframe things. You tell yourself every relationship has seasons. But this one feels like winter that never turns toward warmth anymore. You begin grieving them before you've left. You feel the absence while sitting right next to them, and that absence speaks louder than words ever could. You look at old photos and wonder if those smiles were already starting to fade. If part of you knew, even then, that the timeline was shifting, you'd stop reaching out as often. You don't announce it. You just let the space grow naturally. You let the silence speak its truth. You start protecting your peace more fiercely than the comfort of staying. You understand that healing sometimes requires separation, not more trying. You no longer argue. Not because you've made peace, but because fighting feels pointless when your needs echo inside a room that no longer holds them. You imagine a life without this connection. And surprisingly, that thought doesn't terrify you. It softens something inside. It makes space for breath again. You feel sadness, of course, but the sadness is cleaner now. It's not heavy with confusion or hope, just quiet clarity that this chapter is gently closing. You stop romanticizing the potential and begin respecting the reality. In doing so, you reclaim your power in a way that doesn't need permission. You walk away slowly, not in bitterness, but in self-respect. And that moment doesn't feel like loss. It feels like coming home to yourself. Healing doesn't always look like moving on. Sometimes it looks like sitting still in the quiet and letting yourself feel the things you kept avoiding for too long. You wake up and instinctively reach for the thought of them. But slowly, gently, you begin reaching for yourself instead. And that is a sacred shift. You still miss them in small, ordinary moments. A song, a time of day, a phrase they used to say. Missing them doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. You remind yourself that you left not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself in a way the relationship could no longer hold. There are days when you still want to reach out, not to rebuild, just to feel close. But you breathe through it and let the wave pass without shame. You don't have to rush your forgetting. Healing isn't about erasing them. It's about remembering without aching and feeling without drowning. Some memories will always be soft. That's not a weakness. That's proof you lived fully, that you once showed up with an open heart and open hands. You cry sometimes without knowing why. The body remembers. Even when the mind is clear, the chest still carries echoes of what used to feel like home. You start to notice your laughter again, not the polite kind you gave away to keep peace, but the deep, full kind that rises from an unburdened place. You realize your thoughts are no longer orbiting their silence. Your emotions are no longer chained to their absence. Suddenly, the world feels wider. You find comfort in your own rituals, the tea you pour, the bed you make, the music you choose. Small things become sacred when you begin again. You forgive yourself for staying too long, for loving too much, for hoping too deeply. You understand now that none of those were mistakes. They were human. You stop looking for closure in their words. You write it yourself, not with bitterness, but with clarity and compassion for the version of you that loved. Healing teaches you that peace is not about forgetting. It's about creating space where the wound used to live and planting something softer in its place. You stop performing strength. You allow yourself to feel weak, feel slow, feel uncertain. And strangely, that honesty makes you stronger than pretending ever did. You begin honoring what your body always knew, the knots in your stomach, the sighs before speaking, the tiredness after being near them. That was truth. You catch your reflection and finally recognize yourself. The one who tried, the one who loved deeply, the one who left before losing herself completely. You no longer fantasize about them returning. You no longer need them to understand. Healing no longer requires them. It begins and ends with you now. Some days you still feel a sting, but now you don't panic. You just place a hand on your heart and whisper, "It's okay. We're safe now." And that's how you know you've healed. Not when you forget them, but when remembering them no longer pulls you away from yourself.